Welcome back to the Convo Couch, everyone. Pasta Jardula here.
And I'm Fiorella.
Johnny Sue spinning on the ones and twos, fam.
Yes. So I've had this journalist on before. She's done a lot of work on Syria and on the Middle East, and of course was getting attacked by the BBC because the BBC is a beacon of truth and justice, as we know.
Yeah.
And so as she was completely just, dismantling the lies regarding the Syrian chemical attacks, she has this knowledge that as somebody that's also in the region, that is very necessary right now during these times. So we thought it'd be a great idea to bring on Vanessa Beeley to talk about what is happening in Syria, what's really, really happening. Thank you, Vanessa, for coming on.
Hi, thanks for having me back on, and happy birthday.
Hey, happy birthday.
So I know it's I wanted to discuss this because I don't think that many people here that are actually trying to do real journalism or trying to do real commentary are very well aware of the intricacies. I mean, we still have a lot of progressives here that think the Syrian chemical attacks are real. And so we wanted to bring you on to talk about what just happened, because it took the Biden administration literally no time to begin dropping
36
bombs.
days, fam. They practice a little caution and patience and whatnot. Yeah. No, I mean, it's 36 days.
So 36 days, right? And then they stated that they bombed the facility used by, quote, Iranian-backed militias. And then later that evening, General Lloyd Austin stated that the U.S. bombed Shiite militias. So who exactly, Vanessa, did we bomb, and what role did they play in that region?
Well, I mean, this is crazy. This was supposed to be a strike. How did they describe it? A preemptive self-defense strike, basically, which sounds so familiar to the Israeli justification for aggression against Syria, or, of course, against Gaza or Lebanon, of course. And so basically Biden or the administration and Pentagon were claiming that this was retaliation for the rocket attack on the Ain al-Assad base inside Iraq. And if you actually look at the map, it's around 500 kilometers away from the area that Biden targeted, which was actually inside Syria at a place called Al-Bukamal, which is in the northeastern corner of Syria on the border with Iraq. It's also worth pointing out that it's a very strategic crossing border between Syria and Iraq for trade and also for the protection of that border. It's protected by the PMU, the Popular Mobilization Forces or unit, which is an Iraqi military unit. It has some support from Iran, just to give some justification to the Pentagon's Iranian proxy narrative. But in reality, the PMU comprises of Sunni Muslim Yazidis, Christians. It's representative of Iraqi culture and society, basically. And it's a group that was largely responsible in collaboration with the Iraqi army for defeating ISIS inside Iraq and preventing the invasion actually of Baghdad, where, of course, the Green Zone, the American occupation complex that I've had the really unpleasant memory of visiting in 2017. I'll actually tell you a really funny story, right? The Green Zone is the main American complex inside Baghdad. We were staying there for a conference. We actually went out with the PMU for a day's visiting various sites in Iraq. We came back after 11 o'clock at night. And bear in mind, we were Europeans, we were Americans, we were all nationalities. The security forces at the Green Zone inside Iraq told us we can't come in because it's too late. Where are we going to stay? We had to go and find another hotel at midnight in Iraq, in Baghdad, to stay for one night because the American security forces at the Green Zone wouldn't allow us back into our hotel that was part of the complex under the control of the Americans. So I just want to give you some idea of how crazy this situation is, that here is this, and I mean, the complex itself is hideous in the middle of Baghdad, and it's completely controlled by the US, despite the fact that it's on Iraqi territory. That was a bit of an aside, but I just wanted to tell that story because it still kind of blows my mind even now. So basically, the story that they had killed or they had disabled, let's say, the ability of Iranian proxies to target US bases, that of course the Iraqi government or parliament has requested that the US remove all military occupation forces from inside Iraq. This narrative was basically not true. And if you look at the distance, I mean, I think it's 300 miles or around 500 kilometers to the actual point of attack against the US base in Erbil. It's clear that this was not a targeting of anyone that is a threat to a US military base. This was a targeting of Syrian territory on the border with Iraq to send a message to Damascus that the Biden administration is ramping up the aggression against Syria on the basis that there are Iranian proxies inside Syria. You know, this is the whole point. The whole rhetoric about the war with Iran, in my opinion, the US is not going to take on Iran directly, but what it will do is target Iranian proxies inside Syria because it doesn't want to admit defeat in Syria. So I think under Biden, we're going to see, as I said before, a ramping up of the aggression, the military aggression and the multi-spectrum aggression against Syria on this pretext.
Vanessa, I also like to just point out really, really quickly, I think that we can also, the reason, you know, you see General Lloyd Austin saying, oh, there was Shia militia. I think they're trying to program people to think that Shia militias are strictly Iranian militias. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that a lot of Shia militias do come out of Iraq, do they not?
Yeah, I mean, the PMU itself, as I said, it's representative of pretty much all cultures inside Iraq, as is, for example, the Syrian Arab Army. It's not a Shia militia. Of course, in the beginning of the conflict against Syria, that was very much how it was described. They were described as an Alawite militia, loyal to the Syrian president. And in reality, the Syrian Arab Army is equally inclusive of all minorities and communities inside Syria, as is the PMU in Iraq. So to describe any of these militia or army forces, armed forces, as Shia militia is misleading.
Yeah.
But of course, the majority of Americans and the majority of people in the West, in the UK and the EU, are unaware of the intricacies of these organizations, how they were established, how, for example, the PMU works very closely with the Iraqi government and the Iraqi army, as I said, to defeat ISIS in Iraq, but without the support of the US, and to rebuild Iraq after the battles against ISIS, to rebuild bridges, roads, etc. And also in the early stages of entering the political arena, very much as Hezbollah did in Lebanon, of course. There are some parallels between the PMU and Hezbollah. Both are described, of course, as Iranian proxies, where in reality, although they may consider Iran their ally, they are, Hezbollah is Lebanese, right? They are Shia. But again, Hezbollah has always made it very clear that it's not interested in imposing a Shia ideology on Lebanon. It's interested in power share. The same with the PMU in Iraq. It's not about imposing their ideology. It's about being inclusive.
Yeah.
And so last time we had spoken, right, you had hinted that people were not necessarily looking forward to a Biden administration, but that really not necessarily things would change. How has that sentiment and played out and developed since the Joe Biden took over?
Well, nothing has changed except that actually the US military footprint is increasing. And of course, from the moment that we knew Biden was going to be president, what we started to see was an uptick in ISIS attacks, a reemergence of ISIS attacks against Syrian Arab army positions, against areas where they knew that the meager amounts of oil that the Syrian government is allowed to take from its own territory. Of course, the rest of it is occupied by the US, and it's being used to provide revenue for its various proxies in the northeast of Syria, which include ISIS. And they include, of course, the Kurdish Contras, the separatists from within the Kurdish communities in that area. And so we saw an increase in ISIS attacks from around New Year's Eve onwards. What we also saw in tandem with that, of course, was an increase or an intensity in Israeli attacks, missile attacks on what, again, they described as Iranian bases inside Syria. And I think it was towards the end of January, there was an attack to the north of Damascus, where they actually killed almost an entire family. 5 members of one family were killed in a Israeli rocket attack against Iranian militia in Hama to the north of here. And I visited the area shortly after the attack. As I said, a family of 5 were murdered in that attack, and 4 other members of that family were very badly injured in the attack. And of course, there is no culpability for Israel. It's simply dismissed as we have the right to preemptively defend ourselves and to target Iranian militia bases inside Syria.
No. It's funny because I hear George Bush's voice in my head, fam, going, we got to bomb them over there so they don't bomb us over here. So we got to go on the defense by attacking. But, obviously now with Biden, I think for people sitting here in this couch, we knew the foreign policy was going to be amped up, especially when it came to what happened in Syria. I think they can never get over their failed policies from the Obama years. Syria has been long allied with Iran and Russia. This time around, what do their roles play with this whole conflict that seems to be re-escalating again?
Well, of course, I mean, the interesting thing is that recently when we saw the kind of shift around of the American bases in the Northeast, that came immediately after the information that Russia was going to extend its airport on the eastern coast of Syria in Tartus to enable it to use planes that were capable of carrying nuclear weapons. Now, as soon as that news came out, what we saw was the Americans basically scuttling up into a triangle on the border with Turkey, Syria, and Iraq, right in the furthermost corner of the Northeast, an area which, by the way, is extremely oil rich, as is all that area in the Northeast. And what we see at the moment, after the Biden attack, we've seen a response from Russia that is uncharacteristically impatient and irritable. They're reaching the end of their tether with both Israel and the US aggression and unlawful occupation of Syrian territory. And you need to remember that America is not only occupying and increasing that occupation under Biden. I mean, this was quite funny. We were literally receiving information of American convoys entering Syria from around New Year onwards. So leading up to Biden's inauguration, we were immediately dismissed as conspiracy theorists while we had images of convoys of up to 50, 60 American vehicles bringing in military hardware, artillery, armored cars, logistical equipment to the existing bases and the new bases. And it's also worth mentioning that the US has just established a new base just on the other side of the border between Iraq and Syria in Anbar, which will also be an air base. So clearly under Biden, what we're seeing is an increase of the US military footprint, a deployment of armed forces despite the pandemic, I hasten to add. Troops seem able to move around. ISIS doesn't get COVID-19, by the way. We never hear about ISIS being struck down by it. So they obviously have developed some kind of magical immunity to it. But you also have the American base in Al Tanaf on the border with Jordan, which has been established, I think, under Trump. It was established. That has a 55-kilometer exclusion zone around it. And within that zone, America is running military exercises with various armed groups, including ISIS, that are being recruited and trained in the Rukban refugee camp, which is literally just to the south of Al Tanaf. So effectively, America is percolating ISIS between Iraq and Syria. It's regularly, in the last few days, it's airlifted ISIS terrorists into the northeast. From there, it's transported them by military helicopter into the Badia Desert, which is in the Deir ez-Zor region, to carry out, as I said, these kind of isolated terrorist cell attacks against Syrian Arab Army positions and Russian positions.
But I thought they were moderate rebels.
Yeah. Moderate rebels.
Who, ISIS?
They're farmers and doctors. That's what Obama told us.
No, I mean, ISIS is the reason that America is there, right? I mean, ISIS is the whole reason that America is in Syria, to defeat ISIS. But in reality, ISIS is just another rebrand of the whole American-produced terror concept, which has enabled them, of course, to carry out the war on terror, which is the war of terror, since 9/11.
Right. And, Vanessa, a lot of Americans still don't know, a lot of the West in particular, but it's specifically Americans, since we're here in America, don't really know what sanctions are. Some of them are like, well, some sanctions are good and they, it's not war. Can you explain to people how you've seen the population of the Middle East, in particular where you are right now, be affected by these sanctions?
I mean, sanctions for me is it's criminal aggression. Sanctions never, ever target what the US government and the UK government tell you they are targeting. They target human beings. They target the poorest of the poor. They target people that are already starving, are already struggling under military aggression. So they basically double down on the misery and the bloodshed and the poverty of the target nation. And under Trump, of course, I tend to see Trump's administration as having been the economic sledgehammer in preparation for the incoming Biden administration, which would, of course, go back to the kind of the Obama-Clinton roadmap in Syria, which had been to some degree derailed just before Trump came in with the entrance of Russia into the conflict on behalf of Syria and at the request of Syria, which of course then turned the military tide against the US coalition. So Trump's economic warfare, if you like, which Biden is maintaining, by the way, it's not as if he's coming in. I mean, when he first arrived, there were various papers flying around sort of saying, we'll lift the sanctions basically if the Syrian government surrenders completely, right? If you read between the lines, the kind of the double speak and the smoke and mirrors and all the rest of it that they put into these think tank reports. Basically, the bottom line was, we'll lift the sanctions when and if the Syrian government complies with every single demand that we have. In other words, if they surrender, right? Which is just not going to happen. So we know that the sanctions will continue. But look, you have to consider that the sanctions are being combined with military aggression, which has been going on for 10 years. Under Trump, the burning of crops, including wheat, barley, cotton, entire areas of olive groves, forestry. The terrorists themselves have occupied many of the agricultural regions deliberately. It's all about depriving the Syrian people of their resources. America occupies the oil resources in the northeast. in order to provide revenue for its proxies, as I mentioned, but also to deprive the Syrian people of their oil resources, which means we don't have electricity. I think I've said to you before, here I have 4 hours off, 2 hours on. In the next district to me, they only have 1 or 2 hours per day. And we've had a pretty cold winter here. There's no heating fuel. Queues for car fuel are back up to 10, 20 kilometers if you go into Damascus. There's no fuel.
Yeah.
Right. There's no gas. Everything is difficult to get hold of here. And the thing is, I had a meeting with the health ministry just a few days ago. And they were saying to me that the worst hit sector is the health sector. They're now unable to replace machinery. They're unable to repair machinery. They're unable to get the drugs, particularly, for example, for chronic illnesses like cancer anymore. They're unable to communicate with doctors in Europe that they've worked with historically because they're not allowed to talk to them under their Caesar law. They can be prosecuted for actually providing equipment or help or advice or anything to those that are, apparently under these draconian, sadistic Caesar law sanctions that are affecting every atom of Syrian life and reducing it down to absolute poverty and misery. We have screaming inflation here, thanks to sanctions. Yeah. But the price of food is going sky high because they're deprived of their agricultural resources, right? So from every possible, and they're under blockade because of the pandemic, right? All their neighboring countries are being thrown into turmoil. Everything is about targeting Syria, about tightening the blockade, tightening the siege, tightening the economic pressure, both on the state, but again, as I keep saying, it targets the people. Sanctions are never, ever, ever, ever a solution because they will only ever cause absolute horror for the people. Look at Yemen. Absolute classic case. I love it when all these humanitarian I hate it when all these humanitarian organizations talk about, humanitarian disaster. No, it's a manufactured humanitarian disaster. Call Absolutely. It out for what it is. It isn't just some starvation that just appeared out of nowhere. It was orchestrated and engineered by the US Saudi coalition and by the UN, just as it was in Iraq.
Yeah, it's a shame too, because I fight with my conservative friends all the time and I tell them about these sanctions and they just look at it as a tool for negotiating to get what they want. It's like, no, it doesn't work that way. But let's stay with what we're talking about right now, because you had mentioned that it's been 10 years now of seeing this, all this, this chaos and destruction. In the mainstream media, we don't see much about Assad nowadays. How strong is his support from his citizens and the Syrian Arab army, and also with Russia? Because I heard you say a couple questions ago that it looks like they're losing patience with the Russian government. They're starting to lose patience. So how is the relationship between Assad and all those aspects, and what might happen moving forward?
No, I was talking about Russia losing patience with the US and Israel.
Yeah.
The relationship between Damascus and Moscow is still very
strong. Intact? Okay.
Yeah, no, that is still strong, as is the relationship between Russia, Iran, and Damascus. It is, although Russia and Iran are sort of slightly unlikely allies, they do actually collaborate very closely here in Syria. I've seen it, particularly from a military standpoint. Hezbollah, Iran, Russia, for example, in the battles to retake areas of southern Idlib. I was actually there for quite a lot of those operations. And you see the collaboration between the three forces, or the four forces: Syrian Arab Army, Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, on the ground. And without that collaboration, a lot of those military victories to liberate those areas would not be possible. So that relationship, and with Russia, of course, the relationship is very strong diplomatically in the UN Security Council, etc. They collaborated very strongly over exposing the corruption at the OPCW that had retrospectively justified the UK, French, and US unlawful aggression against Syria in April 2018. For President Assad, his support is still extraordinarily strong. There are elections here in Syria in April, May, I think. the date, everyone keeps giving me different dates, but I think it's around April anyway. And so that also explains why I think there's going to be greater military aggression, multi-spectrum war pressure from the Biden administration to try and derail any victory for President Assad in the upcoming elections, because, that is just going to rub their nose in it. So what we're actually seeing is a kind of, I keep calling it a Milosevic operation against President Assad. There are now a number of legal cases coming to the forefront, particularly in the media. There was a recent case in Germany against an alleged former intelligence officer of the Assad government, who was convicted of torture. There is a case that has been rumbling along at the ICC. They've recently changed the prosecutor at the ICC to a British QC, Karim Khan, who has connections to the lawyers' chambers that are effectively trying to push the case against Assad. So we're kind of seeing all this pressure coming in from different angles: military, economic, legal, political, media. The media narratives are ramping up again under Biden. It's like everyone feels empowered. The media, the terrorist groups have been conducting attacks against Russian and Syrian positions again in southern Idlib. Turkey is starting to annex more territory. Do you know what I mean? It's like everyone feels, yay, like Biden's here. We can get back to normal.
Yeah.
The Kurds kind of felt betrayed by Trump. Now under Biden, they feel that they have someone who's going to take up their cause again. So it's like the whole war has actually been re-energized.
Wow.
Which is kind of, it's kind of scary for people here.
Shit.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be extremely scary. And that's why, voices like yours are valuable, but your voice has been under attack. I know you were banned on Twitter, and you've been persecuted by the state media propagandists at the BBC for your reporting on Syria. Do you think these people are scared, or and do you think some people now are seeing through their propaganda? Like, is that changing at all?
I think we're seeing, and I kind of like to say this in a way, I think we're seeing desperation. Right. When the BBC has to publish a 7,000 word article to basically carry on the smear against me because the first smear didn't really work. It's to me, it's a sign of desperation. Jewish Chronicle has just contacted me with all the same questions that the BBC asked me. I'm like, what is wrong with you people? They're starting to look really tired because, people are bored of reading this stuff. For the last 4 years, it's been the same old rehash of smears against me. And nothing evolves, nothing moves forward. And yet the evidence against their narrative is growing on a daily basis, right? But they're not evolving with it. They're just sticking to the kind of default propaganda. And people are starting to see that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, do you have any more questions for Vanessa right now? Or
yeah,
more?
I wanted to point out, you were also attacked and smeared recently by the BBC. You posted this tweet that I wanted to show. On March 2nd, you said, "It appears that the BBC M16, I make no differentiation between the two, believe they would intimidate me by publishing an image of a car I drive in Syria. Below is an email I sent to Emma Rippon and Chloe Haji Mateo, and Rippon's reply. You can judge for yourselves if this is targeted harassment." So they had posted that you're pro-Assad, that you denied being pro-Assad, and they posted a picture of your car. That is a little excessive. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, basically, it is targeted harassment. And,
Right.
if I had to speculate on this, I would say this was a British intelligence operation to intimidate me, using the BBC to put the message out there. As I explained to them, foreign nationals can't own cars here. So it's a car that I use that belongs to a friend of mine. And they've now put him at risk, because when they initially published the photo, they showed the full number plate, which then can be easily traced to the owner. So this is effectively like pointing a big finger and saying, this woman supports Assad. So if there are any terrorist cells in Damascus or the surrounding countryside, the potential is for targeting the car. For sure. I mean, I don't use the car when I go to Frontlines, or because it would be a little bit too obvious. I use a taxi or another car. But this is a car that I use just for, running around and so on. So this was kind of extraordinary. And I made the point that, okay, if they're going to condemn me for using someone else's car, by the way, the majority of cars in Damascus have pictures of President Assad in the back of them. That's pretty standard procedure here. I struggle to find a car, even in this street, which is relatively quiet. 4 out of the 5 cars have pictures of President Assad in them. It's pretty standard here, right? So this was quite funny, actually. This was a funny part of it. But the other serious part of it is the BBC themselves have been filmed, particularly in 2013, BBC Panorama Saving Syria's Children, which has been forensically debunked as a staged event. But in that production, they were seen driving in a vehicle which had an ISIS banner in the back of it. So my point is, okay, if you're going to throw this one at me, that if I'm driving a car with a picture of the internationally recognized president of the government of this country, then I'm going to say to you, do you equally condemn your own producers for driving around in a car that has the insignia of an internationally recognized terrorist group?
Yeah, exactly. This is ridiculous. I mean, this is insane right now.
We just say they're airlifting ISIS all over the place right now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Have
you ever met Assad, by the way?
Yeah, I met President Assad in 2016 when I actually came to Syria for the first time with the US Peace Council delegation. And again, this is hilarious. This is another way that they consistently try to smear me. We had our photo taken with President Assad and the whole delegation, but I happened to be standing next to the president. So they cut out everyone else from the delegation and shared this photo center page in the Sunday Times as me as an Assadist, because here I am standing next to the president. And when I describe this as my proudest moment, of course, they all regurgitate this smear. And I have explained to them, I said, of course, it was my proudest moment. I came to Syria to foment peace, not war. So why would I not be proud of that, right? I came as part of an American delegation, the first American delegation to come to Syria to actually try to understand what was happening here and to foster peace. Not to supply weapons to terrorists and to foster war, but to actually foster peace. So yeah, I am kind of proud of that.
Wow. Well, Vanessa, thank you so much for coming on here and speaking with us and letting us know, because I didn't know it was some of the things you told us. Like we didn't know that they were literally supplying all, taking ISIS in helicopter friendly rides like this.
Still training them and
this is
and just quickly because this is really important, the US with UK financing is now establishing it's doubling the size of the ISIS holding camp in the northeast. So effectively it's taking it from holding 5,000 ISIS fighters and their families to 10,000 under the control of the US UK coalition. with the Kurds also controlling the camps. So this is a clear indication of Biden's policy, which will be to use this camp to blackmail both Russia and Damascus to potentially leak ISIS fighters out of the camp to carry out operations inside Syria. I mean, this is just extraordinary. And you also have to remember that there are ISIS fighters that are American, that are from the UK, that are from the EU, that are from all over the world, actually, that are being held and trained for sure and re-equipped in those camps.
Yeah.
So we're just going to see this
Escalate
Yeah.
and escalate and escalate.
Well-
Meet the new boss.
same as the old boss.
Yeah.
Vanessa,
Yeah.
can you tell people where they can find your work and follow you on social media?
Yeah, sure. I think like everyone, I'm kind of swapping around at the moment because we keep getting censored at different sites. So I'm on Patreon still at the moment and Rockfin.
Yay.
Yay. I'm just getting going there. It's such hard work maintaining all these sites.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, it's something we've got to do because they're targeting pretty much all of us on pretty much all platforms right now, right?
They absolutely are. They're censoring us crazy.
And you always have a spot right here on the Convo Couch with us, though.
Oh, bless
We
you.
are really
Thank
proud
you.
of the work you
Well,
do.
I'll be back for your birthday for sure.
April 14th, my birthday. Bring a gift.
Your presence
I'll
is our
be
gift.
there.
Don't worry. Thank you, Vanessa. And
Thanks.
best of luck. We'll be monitoring the situation. I always go to you for anything regarding foreign policy in the Middle East. So thanks so much.
Stay safe.
All right. Thanks. And happy birthday and have a really good day.
Stay safe. Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Combo out.
Peace.